You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Hey, this is Dr. Alex G, and welcome to another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. First, let me say I am excited that almost each week I'm noticing new countries following this podcast. The most recent has been Argentina, 52 downloads in a week. I also see the numbers of individuals in the UK increasing, and it's just exciting. I've noticed a few from Central America and Mexico. So keep listening, keep learning, keep living better, keep telling your friends about the podcast. And what this means to me is that people around the world really want to believe that we can wrestle with some of the ugliness of racial disparity, and that we can build meaningful relationships. And so I'm really excited to hear that. So please keep listening. It means a lot to us. And as you have thoughts or comments, you can follow me on Twitter. It's at Alex G Jr., AlexGeejr. You can find me on Facebook, or you can go to my website, alexg.com. But let us know what questions or thoughts that you have, because we'd love to incorporate it into the show. All right. So part of my work is really building meaningful relationships cross-culturally, not just the superficial stuff, because I don't really have time for the superficial. But I have found that there are people from every ethnic group and background that's interested in building cross-cultural relationships. And so I've been the beneficiary of some of those relationships. But what happens is when my well-intentioned friends do what I called whitesplaining. There's a definition of this in the Urban Dictionary. It's when a white person commits a heinous act only to have it explained away as not really being that bad, or otherwise given the benefit of the doubt in a way that would never be extended to anyone who wasn't white.
I don't know about the use of heinous there, Alex. It's a bit strong.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a little harsh, I think. Some of the language
I'm just telling you what the definition is. The dictionary, the Urban Dictionary.
Could you repeat it? I didn't.
It is when a white person commits a heinous act, an intentional heinous act, only to have it explained away, like, oh, she didn't mean that, or she dates a black guy, or they've adopted black kids. And so it's just whitewashing and explaining ugly things that white people say.
Yeah, maybe we could adjust the word intentional a little bit. I don't know if that's always
maybe implicit. There's some implicit in there, implicit bias.
So listen,
I want to make sure you know I didn't mean to cut you off there.
All right,
like, but you were just kind of giving
white man. I'm going to need you to stand down for a second. So as you can tell, I've got some of my crew and my friends in the studio with me. So I've got Eli, Jeremy, and Tyler. They're part of my team in helping to put out this great podcast each week, and I really appreciate the help behind the scenes. But I've asked them to join me in the studio today because I do want to talk about this a little bit. And then later on, I want to talk about just some comments I received after doing a WPR interview about the Starbucks incident. But I just got to tell you that, well, let me start off by this comment that Joe Biden made, former vice president. Now, keep in mind that when right now I'm speaking for all black people, when we pull out these kinds of quotes, we're not necessarily trying to say this person is flawed, that they are intentionally racist, that they're out to get black people. It really is a chance to look at how we hear things differently in a cross-cultural context, and that's very important if we're going to build a relationship. So on January 31st, 2007, Joe Biden is quoted as saying, I mean, you got the first mainstream African-American who is articulate and bright and clean and a nice-looking guy. I mean, that's a storybook man. Now, on one hand, that sounds very complimentary. I mean, do either of you white gentlemen see this as being complimentary? We'll get into the backstory. I'll let you know what I think about it. But I'm saying to mainstream white America, does this sound toxic or problematic?
I don't think to the average white person it would sound pretty complimentary.
Sure.
I think for the most part.
Yeah, it's all nice things.
Yeah.
Mainstream.
That's what you want from a candidate, right?
That's right. And so I've got to tell you, and I think he probably meant well too. And so again, this is not to bash the former vice president, but because we're talking about whitesplaining, because he later came out and said he apologized and remarks were taken out of context. But I know as an African American, I hate being called articulate, because it's almost as if people are shocked that I can speak English.
Oh.
It's like we thought something else was going to come out of your mouth. But he has, like, not only does he have, articulate, but he's got bright and clean. Now,
because most people are dirty and most people are dirty.
Does he
and
mean
unintelligent.
politically clean, or does he mean like he just see? I read this and I just thought, he's not scruffy. He smells good. He wears cologne. All these different things, but articulate, bright, clean. I mean, most people who have a JD from an Ivy League school, or people who participate in their law school, what's it called, law school journals or whatever that school, and you do that, you are sharp. But and again, this is not to bash the vice president. Last time I'm going to do a disclaimer, but in our community, black folks started thinking, what? He picked him to be his vice president candidate? Is he shocked that he's articulate? Are you going to continue to embarrass the president and the nation? But this is just a great example, before we get into some other questions. This is a great example of where we think that there's some whitesplaining, where we're just asking, like, let's talk about his record. Let's talk about his fundraising ability. Let's talk about his grassroots skills. Like, none of that comes up in here. It's just that he's clean, he's articulate, he's nice looking. That's interesting. Thoughts about that?
Yeah, I know from my perspective, like, yeah, I mean to be completely honest, that quote you said, I think you said it was from 2007, right before the presidential campaign and all that. And at that point, I would say that I didn't feel like I had any sense of consciousness at all in any way, shape, or form.
And what he said.
Yeah, I would have just been like, well, yeah, at that point, which is crazy when you think back on it now. Sure. But yeah, I think a lot of times your first reaction is, oh, he's just like cool. Yeah, he is very, and yeah,
he is kind of good looking. Yeah, I can give him that.
Yeah. So
not like a John Shaft kind of good looking, or like a Denzel, but maybe kind of like a Sidney Poitier.
Yeah. Well, and you see it all the time in the news and the narratives that are portrayed across news sites, is they use those sort of buzzwords. So yeah, it's interesting how America sort of frames it that way.
That's interesting. And I'm sorry.
No. I mean, and I think I'm a little bit older than Tyler. I mean, and so I had some conscience about what was going on at the time. But I mean, I remember I used to teach speech at the university, and we would analyze Obama's first speech at the Democratic National Convention, and the speech teacher was like, "This guy's a long game, right? You don't make a speech like this, blowing people away for generations,
right? And
like speeches in Philadelphia, and not have a 10-year plan."
That's true.
But yeah, but when I can imagine, like, people from where I come from in Pennsylvania hearing this quote, being like, "Oh yeah, he's right," being like, "Oh yeah, he is." I mean, he's not what I would expect out of an African American.
Sure.
And interpret what he says is in a complimentary sense.
Sure.
When I looked at it, I'm like, I mean, Joe Biden, I think, has been a gaffe machine over the course of his political career. I mean, he's
he's
if there's
go
like a
pothole
he drives in it, if there is a bucket somewhere, he steps in it. And I get. I mean, I can see, but he's a grown ass man, right? And it's like, I mean, he didn't call him boy in there,
sure.
But it was, I mean, at best, it comes off as ignorant, which is like about the only defense you can say for it. I mean, it's like, so like this editor of his law journal, like one of the brightest stars in the Democratic Party. Oh, it turns out he's articulate. I'm like, what else would he be?
And I'm also wondering. Now I'm going to give Biden the benefit of the doubt. I wonder if he in wanting to play the real game is trying to adjust or address, I should say, what he thinks white America needed to hear about President Obama, and using some of those keywords. Again, when I hear someone tell me that I'm articulate, as a kid, I just thought that was as a compliment, and I said, "Oh, thank you," until I started processing what people meant. Now, this is where things get a little tricky, because when our non-black listeners or friends hear this, they think, "Come on, guy, just let up, stop being so." But I just asked my white friends, "How often are you called articulate?" I remember I had a homeroom teacher years ago and in high school, and he wrote in my yearbook, and he said to Alex, "A nice looking black kid." So I don't know if that meant if I were white I'd be ugly, or if I'm surprisingly nice looking as a black person. And I'm sure I don't. You know what? I don't even know what he meant, because he was my homeroom teacher, and so I never told people he was my white homeroom teacher. So I didn't know that he thought. I mean, obviously I want him to know that I'm black, and probably was somewhat complimentary that I thought I was nice looking. But to say a nice looking black kid, again, it just sounds like it's an anomaly, or the two don't really go together. It wasn't like, hey, for the past 4 years you've been the class clown, or I've looked forward to you being in homeroom, or you brought some life to homeroom. But it's those are the things that you hear that either makes you feel people are uncomfortable with you, or they can't get beyond the blackness, so they've got to sort of name that black elephant in the room to prove that they're not oblivious to it. But it's in those moments that I just stop for a second, and I'm reminded that people see me differently. So again, it's not that was an insult, but it's just a reminder. My homeroom teacher saw me differently because we had 30 kids in the class, and I'm sure that he didn't say, hey, you're a cute blonde girl, you're a strapping young blonde male. But I was the nice looking, good looking black kid in the classroom. I was the only black kid in the classroom, so you don't want to compare me to.
I think the white person says, "Oh, like you're not a thug. That's cool. That's good for you. I think you probably won't end up like shooting someone or doing drugs and end up in prison. Good on you."
You helped me to not see your color, Alec. That's what. To me, I feel like those comments are. You helped me. Wow. You helped me to think differently about black people.
Wow.
Rather than doing the work internally, so now it's incumbent upon me to balance that feeling that that people have, and as a kid, I mean, this was 1981. I wasn't going to take on a homeroom teacher, and I liked him. He made homeroom fun. But had he said that to me the first day in 9th grade, it would have changed our relationship. That's retirement. I've seen him a few times, but there's not a time that his name comes up, or that I bumped into him, that I've not thought about what he wrote in my yearbook. And it wasn't traumatizing. I didn't need counseling after it. It was just one of those things where I think I proved or disproved something in his mind, and he just sort of let that out. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting.
How often do you hear those comments now?
I hear, well, I hear those comments a lot, particularly in a community, like Madison. And just growing up, I would hear those things, that people would just. When I wrote my article years ago, Justified Anger, I think the Cap Times made a great statement by letting me pen it. I mean, it was clearly that this happened, and I wrote it. It was not an interview. They wanted to make sure that I did it, and they did a very little editing on it, because I'm a writer. I've got books that are out, magazine articles. I think part of what people were really they were really touched by the honesty of it, but I think what helped me grow in the eyes of local folks is that I penned it, because as a pastor they expect that I might have that MLK thing going on. As a black minister, I probably have some some verbal skills, but to be able to do that and take complex concepts or my feelings and write it very clearly, it was very interesting to them that I could both articulate my feelings verbally and in writing. But it's interesting, people did not comment about so they responded well to it, but they still, when they hear me give a speech, will comment about my being articulate. So I think that piece comes up quite, and it comes up a lot with my friends, and we collectively have come into the consciousness that that's not necessarily that good of a thing, nor is it necessarily that much of an anomaly, but if we had more black people around, people would know that. And so because we have so few, they just think, wow, you really know how to put a sentence and a verb.
See, and I think that's like for where I grew up in Pennsylvania, where there were almost no black people, almost no real black people, but there were plenty on television. And right. I haven't talked about this on this show, but I grew up watching Cops. Do you know the show?
Yeah, I do.
I mean, it is the worst. I had no. It was on TV when I was a kid. I had no sense of what it was.
I learned a lot about rural white people on that show.
Well, when I was a kid, it was all Latinos and black people. It was just it's the show police officers poke fun at random black criminal and then arrest him. And this was and they would run it back to back on on the weekends and stuff. And these were literally the only images of African Americans I had. And
the Whitesplaining of that would be, well, we're just showing you a slice of America, but when you look at law enforcement, there are not enough black and Latino people to keep every police force alive. And so you know that they're arresting white people. But what you're seeing on television is this, that particular slice, that particular brand.
When I think about the Joe Biden comment, I think I mean, I haven't thought about this much, but like it's like Joe Biden is like, I'm a more progressive white person talking to those other white people.
Right.
And the truth is, and he's like, but when you white-splain to like defend the other white people, I think it's also because you're like defending yourself, because you're like, well, you know, I mean, I'm not totally like them. I'm different, but you can understand it. I mean, I think there's a way in which the white person can be like Joe Biden, say, look, you know, I was worried about a black president, but let me tell you, he's great. It's a way of like making themselves look better than they are.
Now we got to create a term for that. I've got to go back to the drawing board because what I notice is as I develop a more cross-cultural team, my white colleagues, and I expect them to some degree to help be gatekeepers, like of things that I might not see, or helping to speak up against things that I might not have the energy to do. But when I listen to people who are white try to show other white people that I used to be like you, but I'm the new improved. You know, this is Clorox, but I'm the new improved. And so the improved is no longer good. The new improved is what's going on. So to hear individuals, and when done properly, I mean, we need white allies, folks who are really white allies, to take some of those hits and to do that. But when the person has not quite arrived yet and they're trying to explain to other white people, it's very, very interesting. Like yesterday, I was talking with a couple of friends who heard me speak at a downtown event. And intelligent, middle-aged, middle-income white friends, white ladies, and so we're talking about some of the political leaders who they support, who are not really asking questions about race relations in our community, particularly here in the state of Wisconsin. And so the response was, "Well, why do you think that is?" And I said, "Well, you tell me why you think it is." Because I don't want them just regurgitating what a black person feels about this.
Right.
What do you think about your white candidates who you love, but they have not come down from their ivory towers to talk to black people about mass incarceration or drug abuse or the horrible dropout rate or the disparity between blacks and whites that's off the charts and is the worst in the country, the greatest disparity in the country. And so I didn't really want to do that spoon feeding. I wanted them to really begin to think about it. And but my challenge to them was, rather than having the conversation with me, why don't you have it with the candidate? Why don't you write the candidates and ask, hey, we like your work and what you're doing, but we're talking to some, a few black leaders, and they're just mentioning they've not really heard from your office on some of these issues. And so in that situation, I don't know if I'd call that black-splaining or white-splaining, but it's helpful to remind people you do have connections, you do have a voice. Use it when you see that there's some disparity that's going on, and not necessarily think that that's my responsibility. Again, they weren't trying to get me to write the politicians, but I don't think that it had ever occurred to them that they could write them and ask these same questions, that they could ask white person to white person, why aren't you doing certain things, or why are you doing certain things? Because the community is watching. So we do need white colleagues to talk to white colleagues. But I think when someone overdoes what it sounds like Biden was trying to do here, it does come across as a little bit disingenuous, and I think it sounded very disingenuous, and so I think we just got to kind of watch things like this. But it's very interesting. I've got some statements in here that we often hear, and it's white-splained away a lot, and so a couple of you are gonna help me just state these, and then I'll just let you know my comment or feeling about it. And so, hey, Eli, this one we hear a lot. You up first. I just needed to hear it in a white man's voice. That's why I didn't want to. That's why I didn't want to read it.
We truly want diversity, but what we need is the best qualified candidate.
Now, on one hand, that sounds very. Who doesn't want the best candidate?
That's right. Who doesn't?
Yeah. Who doesn't want the best
the
candidate?
The best is the best.
And so, but let me tell you what I hear. When I hear this, I've worked in this community for 35, 40 years. This almost assumes that every white person is qualified, competent, sane, and sober. I've been around enough white people to know that ain't true. So when I hear this, I just continue. I fume inside, because it's almost as if we're asking, when you bring someone black in, lower your standards. Maybe they can't make it every day. Maybe they'll come in like 2 or 3 days. They'll probably go on a couple of days after payday. But let's just bring the whole company down. Let's ignore the bottom line. And so it totally ignores the systemic practices that have taken place in many industries to really keep black people out. And then folks just jump right into, we want the best qualified candidate. And I hear this from people who approach me. I mean, my job is not to force white people to be in touch with these kinds of issues, because that's just too much work. But when people call me or say, I really want diversity, but I really want the best candidate, it's like you're asking me for help, and then you're making this statement. And so do white people really think that they're ruining their staff or their business if they add diversity? Is that why it's so homogenous, because they think that that's the only way they can be successful?
So I think in the white world, I mean, speaking for all white people, Alex.
Yes.
I mean, so part of the story that I grew up with in rural Pennsylvania about like affirmative action, it was like, there was a time when like white people went to college and some exceptional racial minorities. But because we wanted to help lots of people get more education, we lowered our standards in affirmative action to value race over academic quality, to allow less qualified but black candidates into universities so they could be uplifted by the educational experience and do better in life. And then the next generation, their kids would be as qualified as the white candidates, but we had to, because of historical...
kind of help them out.
Right, yeah, we got to help them out a little bit. And this, I mean, this has bred, like, where I came from, I remember, like, when I was... And at some point, I just, like, couldn't listen to most of the people I grew up with. But I remember, like, I was at college, and it was a leader at my church came over and said, like, hope you're doing okay up at, that, like, liberal arts college. There's usually, like, some kind of flavor of the month that's just grabbing everyone's attention, meaning, like, some kind of racial group or something. And I was like, I was 19. Like, I don't even know entirely what that means or, like, what to say about that. But there's this idea that, like, the things that good old white people had enjoyed for a long time were under siege. And
yes.
and because, and the if there is any benevolent part of that, there's like black folks had poor education, and for a long time, and hadn't been able to achieve their success. So we needed to like just.
Here's why I wish you had told them to call me. Here at Wisconsin, we had something that was called the Madison Plan. Chancellor Donna Shalala put this together. She was our chancellor before she was President Clinton's Health and Human Service Secretary, and in my opinion, was a very amazing chancellor. But she created a fund so that if you were from Wisconsin and below the poverty level, you could come here for on grants and not take out any loans. And so I was an advisor in the pharmacy school, and a student was writing a paper against affirmative action. So he was trying to get stats out of me so that he could basically tear this apart. But what he didn't know is that I had done my homework. Out of 100, out of all the students that were receiving the grants, 87% were white rural students. The other 13% were Latino, Native American, and African American, because the situation was similar to my daughter's. I mean, my wife and I both work. We're middle class. My daughter's not going to get grants. She got a scholarship, an academic scholarship. But it's interesting that even when white people are pointing their fingers at these concessions that are made for black people, the people who really took advantage of the program look like the folks you grew up with in Pennsylvania, and not the black folks from Milwaukee and Madison whose parents went to Wisconsin. Because a lot of us went to school here, then we sent our kids here. So like a lot of my friends have sent their kids here for law school, for undergraduate program. But the thought is, when you hear about the chancellor wanting to make this overture to bring more students of color, it was actually white rural students because they were poorer and they qualified. So to me, it's really interesting when you hear about some of these programs and some of these thoughts. But for the students who were not regularly admissible, I was not regularly admissible to the university. It wasn't because I was dumb, it's because I was stupid. I was lazy in high school. I ran track, I was a class clown, and I always knew I was smart, but never really pushed myself. Now, there are probably things that demotivated me, but the other part of it was I think I learned differently. I always struggled with comprehending lots of intensive reading things. So if you said it to me, I could tell you what you said, what you were wearing, what day of the week it was, the angle of the sun, all this stuff. But what people forget is, and so I was admitted into this program for non-regularly admissible students, but the graduation Requirements are exactly the same. They did not lower the graduation. So if you think, here's a person coming in with, it was less than a B. So you come in. But here's the thing. The university felt that I would contribute something to the campus. So I became the vice president of the Black Student Union. I made the men's track team in track and field. That was a bit redundant, but I made the men's track team. I advised the campus and deans on how do you recruit more students. As a student, I went back to my alma mater, my high school, to recruit other Black students. In fact, one was in the studio recently. Mr. Kerr was a high school student that I went back to talk to about the university. But my counselor told me I would not get in, and then the university proved him to be someone to be true. I researched and found his own program. But what people forget is when you do have those kinds of allowances, it's not just because, when it's done right, it's not just because the numbers are off. They look and see, do you somehow make our campus better? And when you consider my contributions to the campus, to the community, to the nation, and to the world, compared to someone who might have a 3.9 who got in, did they get back to the campus? Do they show up? Do they speak? Do they help? Are they philanthropic in their communities? I think that I'm probably a better representative of what the University of Wisconsin-Madison wants from its graduates than a lot of other people that they admitted. And that's what they're looking at. They're looking at who will wear Bucky well, who will make us proud 20, 30 years from now. And they are admitting folks on that standard. But again, I've got to stress, my GPA coming out of college was way better than my GPA going into college. And so we forget the work that you have to do, because I know they helped me to get in. So I knew people were watching and I couldn't let them down. But my eye was on the prize. I knew that they were not going to make allowances for the graduation rate. I needed the same graduating GPA and the same amount of courses. And so students coming in understand that pressure, that we've got to do this because people are watching. But the people who are really getting the money to be on campus, because the campus, they admitted me, but they didn't give me any money because my mother and stepfather worked. We did not qualify. But white rural students from farms in Wisconsin were able to qualify for the money. And so not only were they admitted, they were given money to be here. And it is so hard to get just grants as a graduate student. So that's my little rant on how people see that. And so they're wondering, so now they've somehow ascribed that into all Black folks that are in colleges, that somehow they've been given a program. Been given an offer. Were you about to say something?
I've just been thinking, going back to that question or that statement that you first made. It was about diversity.
We truly want diversity, but I'm gonna have Eli read it again. I don't want to say.
Yeah, we truly want diversity, but what we need is the best qualified candidate.
All right, and we've talked a little bit about the issue there, and I feel like there's a bit of convenience factor there, or perceived convenience even of these individuals.
Go on.
And it kind of like highlights back to this idea that it highlights that their circles and the places where they draw from and their experiences are all things are shaped by white people and whiteness.
Right.
And they're not really entering into any spaces where that's happening. So you always hear that comment, well, we're not finding anyone. Where are they? And it's just like, well, clearly you're not really looking.
Right.
You're looking to your own spots.
It feels like kind of an excuse to me a little bit. Like, I feel like they're protecting themselves and maybe their work environment or university or wherever they're kind of saying, like in the reality, it may be mostly rural white students coming in using this program, but like they have to keep that image. If somebody calls them and say like, well, yeah, we want diversity, but this is really what's happening. We really need the best candidates.
What schools are your admissions counselors spending time in high schools? Where are you choosing to invest that time? So
it's a little more about protecting an image, whether it's the image of the university or image themselves, in their position, that they kind of can make these qualifying statements in case anybody kind of pushes them on it.
Now, the flip of that, gentlemen, is that I've heard folks say, and I actually heard this, during my tenure at the University of Wisconsin, we would love to have more faculty of color, staff of color, but we know that they're so competitive that if someone met our standards, well, Michigan would just hire them away and pay them more money. And so almost giving themselves a free spin that we know they're out there, but the ones that are really qualified, why would they come here when they could get more money in Michigan? So we're not going to put in the effort to try to really recruit those Ivy League folks. But the ones who would come here probably aren't that qualified, and we just want the best the best candidates. So that's really the flip
Wow.
for organizations that are really trying to diversify. They probably realize they can't retain that person, probably because of some of the environmental things that they're experiencing, and that's true to their organizations.
Well, I've got one for you, Alex.
Yes.
I mean the next quotation that you wanted me to read.
Yeah.
All
Let
right.
me hear that.
So I've got we would love for you to join our board because we really want to increase diversity.
Lord, if I had $1 for every time I was recruited to an effort,
Do
I'm
you
gonna
actually hear people say that to you?
oh my gosh, yes. Well, no. The question is, do I ever hear people not say this to me? So here's the thing. There's an organization. I checked out their board. It's an all-white board. I won't give too many details, and it's not. So anyway, they need to really they undertake projects in the community that really helps to create recreational space that really makes money for the white affluent community. And at one point they were bidding for some big, like, world-class games to come here. But when I asked about their contributions back to the community, oh, well, we gave $3,000 to this organization, to this thing. So you're trying to attract, like, something along the lines of the Pan Am Games. I'm talking in code, like the Pan Am Games here in Madison, but you're giving $3,000 to the community. And if the Pan Am Games happen here, the Olympic Games happen here, cycling happen here, that would bring so much money. So I understand this is not just about good competition. There's money behind these games. So Alex, we're just looking at your work, and we just need someone that's smart, that's energetic, that's got good leadership skills. Keep in mind, I've been in this community in a leadership role for 35 years. So for people to just discover me and all of a sudden think I'm smart today, I know what's really going on. I said, okay, come on, I looked at your board. It's all white. You got smart people on it. Why are you really recruiting me? Well, we don't have any diversity. So they'll come out and just say it. Now, I just joined the board because they told me, we want you to help us with diversity. But they said it. And they meant it. They said, okay, we really want you to do this, but we want you to help the board think differently about this. Because what happens is people will put you on their boards and think we're done. We have now done diversity because we've tried to get the most highly profiled black person we can find, so that we can then show them off. Look, we've got one. We have one, and they come to our meetings, and they're going to be on our website. But I joined this particular group because when they said we really want to do a better job of taking services into the community that's only been afforded to an affluent white community, and gave me examples. I said, well, what about this? They said, we would love to do that. Well, how about this idea before I joined? That would be a great idea. So because I felt like they really wanted someone to explain to them what they were doing, I was willing to take the jump. But I also witnessed things that they were already doing, because if they've done nothing and they're waiting for me to arrive to do that, everyone else can easily rest on their laurels and just say, wow, we've got Alex here and he's going to do all this diversity work and he's going to be our diversity hero. And we will live vicariously through his blackness and through his efforts. But and so we sort of have this code around black people. Among black people, we don't do the only ones. Like we say, okay, I'm not an only one. Like, what do you mean? Like, if they want me to be on the board and there's nobody else that's black, I'm not going to be on it. So if they say we want you to be on this board, I know how to go on the website and take a look at it. If I'm the first and only black person, thinking, no, Lord, you know what's going to happen. Whenever there's a shooting or something, they're going to turn to Alex and say, what do you think? Now, while we're talking about all the other good things in the country, I'm never going to be brought to the table on those issues. But if someone makes a remark about the former president, former President Obama, like, did you read this, Alex? I was appalled. Or they're going to tell me about conversations they had over Thanksgiving with white relatives who made disparaging remarks. I'm going to always be brought into those discussions. And so, but if I'm the only one, I'm very, very, very hesitant. So this board that I'm joining, I'm convinced they want to do some things in the community. They're very upfront. They're saying, we understand that what we offer should be afforded to everyone. We don't know how to do this well. So they really want their efforts to change, and not merely the composition or the complexion of their board, which I thought was a real good thing. But there was another black person already on it, so I wasn't. So if they didn't have anybody black on the board, I might have had to pass that up because it's too much work. Do you gentlemen ever get asked to be on the board because you're white and male? Did they ever say we want a white male perspective?
No.
So it's only this show where you get asked to represent white males?
It's nice to feel wanted, you know? Once in a while. It's good.
Well, yeah. I mean, I have a lot of female friends.
Maybe if you stop taking stuff, you can feel wanted.
That's right.
Colonizer. Yeah, I'm sorry. What were you saying?
I have a lot of female friends, probably more than male friends, and I do often get asked to be like, "What are guys thinking about this?" And so, like, in some sense, it's not my whiteness that is the thing, but sometimes they'll be like, well, why do dudes do this? And sometimes I have to answer for all of mankind.
Particularly if folks don't have, if they don't have brothers or uncles. I can see people asking that. But it's here's the thing that's really tricky about the particular quote that Jeremy had is when you're wanted for your complexion, but not for your ingenuity.
Yeah, and only your complexion.
Right. And people don't realize that the two are separate. And so if I could just come and represent blackness on the board, but not bring my mind, because black people have thoughts. And we have concerns not only about how to do black things, but I've navigated the white community for my entire life. So I know a little bit about leadership and about educational empowerment and about fundraising. So there are a number of things that I can really speak into. And people are sometimes shocked when I want to speak into issues other than diversity. So what I have to do is when I get on boards, make sure that I don't just get relegated to outreach, community empowerment, those kinds of boards. And so I want to sit with some of these bank presidents on the finance committee because I want to see what you white people are doing with the money. I want to see where it's coming from. I want to see how you're making distribution. I know what power committees are. So even if we do make it to the boards, we don't typically make it in the power circles. So in all my years of being on boards, I've never, trying to think, only once, and it was actually an organization led by Mr. Care, was I ever part of the executive committee. Typically, I'm on there as a community at large or a community of faith leader or something like that. But in terms of the executive inner circle that's making big decisions, you have to really fight and claw because that's where they put all the CEOs of the financial institutions and the big businesses. That's where they put them. Well,
I'll make this bold statement. I hate the term diversity. I just hate it.
Well, I want you to know black people didn't make it up.
No, I mean, it's
so you got to talk to your people.
Right, I mean, I'll give them a call. Dear white council, tired of this crap. And I mean, there's a longer story that I want to tell sometime about why I don't like it, but the short part is, like, I went to a very small, mostly white liberal arts college in Vermont, which I didn't know much about. Like, I was not, like, a sophisticated consumer college. I was kind of like, but someone said, you should go here. I was like, all right, checked it out. And there was, like, huge diversity initiatives to, like, bring in non-white people from New York City, Boston, Chicago. And there were programs to do it. The general dynamic that I saw was that, like, the school was white. It was charged with being not diverse, right? It was something that previously, I think at some point, like, in history had been like, look at us, we're like all a bunch of successful white people, and it was positive. Then all of a sudden, at some point in the 90s, the tide shifted and it was seen as something that was negative. And people weren't choosing colleges because they weren't diverse. So like executives fly all over the place, and councils and consultants are paid to come up with solutions to it. And the solution is diversity. And at the very beginning, it was a 2-word term. It was racial diversity. Because I also hate when diversity is like, well, we're quite diverse. There's a lot of economic diversity and ethnic diversity.
That's what they say when they can't find the black people to come or don't want to go to Vermont.
Like that is it doesn't even hold true to the original idea. But my experience of that at the school that I went to was that the school was all about changing what the student body looked like, and that was about it. And not changing, like, how they talked about stuff, and some of that, like, it. I mean,
well, they got lazy over the years. I mean, I think
they made sure the kids made it there.
Sure. I mean, I think about the '60s, like when the University of Wisconsin was inviting my mom here.
Yeah.
Where they were, they created something that was called the 5-year program. And which I didn't like that name, but it was a 5-year program. But what happened was they found students from Mississippi, from the South, from large cities, but they had a big push on adult returning students. So I can remember my mother coming here 30, and she had colleagues who I'm friends with today on Facebook. They not only did they go to the university together, they lived in Eagle Heights when Eagle Heights was brand new. I remember when the Eagle Heights is housing for both international, but mainly married students with families. But it's very diverse. It's just very diverse economically, but also ethnically and culturally. But but they got through. They graduated. I remember some of those folks going on to be an aide to the local mayor. But they sent their kids here, and I could name kids who got their law degrees here, went to medical school here, did their undergraduate work here, ended up working on campus. But the campus realized it was not the best campus it could be without the lack of diversity. But they recruited well. They recruited in cohorts. But now those students came and forced the campus to create a Black student union and a Black studies program. So they didn't just come and just say, we're glad to be here. They really gave back to the community. Somehow over the years, we got really sloppy and just wanted diversity for the camera's sake. So we did this cut and paste stuff. But I remember when campuses really meant it. And I don't know if people realize this, but in the 50s and 60s, the Big Ten Conference was known for bringing or recruiting Black students, particularly from the South, that when folks wanted to be teachers or botanists or chemists, they would come to Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, which is how I think some of these college towns got some of their Black population. They recruited, and this conference was the place to go if you really wanted to diversify.
Yeah, and I think like I don't study the educational policy, but I think the smaller schools that I went to, like they were behind the curve, and all of a sudden it became like a big problem. I mean, it had happened lots of places along the East Coast. I just the experience that I had when I was there, where like a lot of students were brought, and there wasn't a whole lot of apparent planning to deal with what it meant for, like folks that are used to living in a city to be in the middle of nowhere in Vermont, and to be in a place. I mean, it was almost like there were two schools. Like I hung out with all the non-white folks, and then there was this whole other. That's
most colleges today. Yeah. That's Wisconsin today. I mean, I love my alma mater, but that's what it's like today. They're separated on the campus and also from the communities. We got to do. Oh my God, we got to do a lot better work than that. We got one more quote that we want to put in.
All lives matter.
I was, with all this going on in our country today, Starbucks incident in Philly, all this stuff. I wasn't even sure if our listeners were ready, but I think we got to bring them up. We got to bring them up to speed. I hate this statement because it's a foregone conclusion. But let me tell you why. Not only because it's insensitive, but people are very genuine in what they say. They're not saying. They're very genuine when they say, well, all lives matter. So there's a disconnect between today and our history. And they don't understand that when they underscore all lives matter, they're lying. Mm-hmm. Because all lives have never mattered in this country. And I'm a proud American. And it's hard to make these truths, to state them, because it somehow feels that I'm not being patriotic or anti-American. And I love this country. My family has served in this country. When I go visit the graves of my relatives in Mississippi or my own grandfather, it states where they've served in the military, in hopes that their kids and grandkids would have a much better reality. And in some ways, we certainly hear about more Black people being shot in the streets, particularly at the hands, unprotected Black men, unarmed Black men at the hands of law enforcement, than probably heard in the times when my grandfather went to the service. But when they say all lives matter, that they all matter, that's an ideal, but that's not real. Not when you look at our history. And I think people are afraid of looking back at the history that'll divide us. My intention on talking about history is to bring us up to speed so people know how we got to where we're going. I don't want to talk about history forever because I'm a visionary. So I want to talk about the future. But, I ran track and field. You can't run the 100 and give some people head starts of 5 yards or 10 yards. Expect everybody to get to the finish line at the same time. You just can't do that. And in America, we have not had the same starting line. And so history is about getting us all to the starting line so that we understand how we got here. So when I hear people say all lives matter, without looking at the disproportionate amount of numbers of unarmed Black men being shot. I was at a meeting recently here in my local community, and the gentleman, he chaired what's equivalent to law enforcement union, but he's the president. He's like an expert, and you can easily see him on a lot of national shows giving commentary when there's been a police shooting of an unarmed Black person. So I was sitting next to this gentleman at this community meeting with Black leaders, and he said, actually, in the state of Wisconsin, more white men are shot by police officers than Black men. It took the air out of the room because we were there talking about it's the committees around law enforcement and communities of color. He throws this out. I'm not lying. Because I was sitting next to him. He came into the meeting a little late and there was a seat next to me. He said, and I'm going to repeat it just the way he said it. Well, actually, in the state of Wisconsin, more white men are shot by police than black men, but the white men are armed. I stopped the meeting and said, excuse me, did you just say armed white men are shot more than unarmed black men? He said, yes. I said, well, how many unarmed black men are shot? He said, we don't have those statistics. But you have the statistics of how many armed white men were shot. You are making it sound as if you're refuting what we're saying, that we need white officers to stop shooting unarmed black men. And your response is white men are shot more, but then you parenthetically state that they're armed. Those are apples and blackberries. I mean, that's not even apples and oranges. How could you sit here in a room full of black leaders and insult our intelligence by saying something like this when you're talking about white men that are on the other side of a car shooting at officers being shot at a greater rate than black men having cell phones or Skittles or Now Laters in their pocket? How can you even state that? And so that infuriated me so much, because he was there to help carry a message back to law enforcement. And instead he was trying to push this propaganda on us, knowing in fact we're talking about unarmed versus armed. And but he sat in a room with all black leaders and tried to push that on us.
What did he say after that?
He went into the whole, well, we don't have statistics on that, but he understands where we are as this country. I mean, this man is not, well, he's a professional. I'm not going to comment on his intelligence or his ability to tell the truth, but you could tell that was part of his soundbite repertoire. Yeah, that's what he could. Yeah, that's what he could say to make white Americans say yes, yes, yes. And it wasn't my meeting. It was being held in another nonprofits group. So I was trying to be kind and responsible. But if I had sat on the other side of the room, I would not have heard what he said under his breath. So I made him say it again, because others just, well, who's going to say something that blatant, and then who's going to lower their voice and say it, and who's going to say that thinking nobody's going to call them out and stop them? Because he was responding to the comment, we need officers to stop shooting unarmed black men. That was the statement. His response was, well, actually, white men get shot more than black men.
Yeah, just a point of math. If you're going to compare two things, you need to actually have two things.
Right.
So if you're going to say white people are shot more in whatever situation, you have to have some other thing.
He's the president of the police union, law enforcement union, and didn't have that stats. So why does he know how many white men were shot? And how does he know that it's more than black men? That's right. Like, why does he know that part of the equation, but doesn't know the other part? So when you have people saying things like that, and they're saying all lives matter, then what that means is African-American people are just making a lot of noise about the unarmed black people that are being shot. But we know our history. So we know about the Emmett Tills and the lynchings and all of these things that started to really put fear in people's hearts. I mean, the connection for me is that lynching and Jim Crow is all about N-word, stay in your place.
Yeah.
Don't date our women. Don't come on our part of the land. Don't look us eye to eye like you're an equal man. Don't try to come on our turf. Don't try to be the same. Certainly don't think that you're better, smarter, or stronger. And so it was all really meant to be a deterrent for anyone who were would-be insurrectionists. You stay in your place. And so what's happening is that that same response is taking place. When people often ask me what happened after the death of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, and being a student of history, I try to look at this, but I also try to read in between the lines. Those assassinations, those shootings were very public, and they were very strategic, and it took the wind out of the collective black sail. It did what lynching was meant to do. It put the fear in people's hearts. We're in this day and time. You're going to take down a president, his brother who is running for president. You're going to take down JFK, RFK. Then you're going to take down Malcolm X and MLK Jr. I think it sent such fear. And then you saw people being shot or killed or put in prison who were the leaders of the Black Panther movement. It sent such a clear message to the black community, stay in your place. And we were so close to covering great ground. And I think that when King started talking about sanctions and economic sanctions and boycotting or standing against the Vietnam War and the Poor People's Campaign, when America saw that he was gaining momentum in broad-based support, I think they had to send a message to say, boy, stay in your place. And so I think we're in this period of time again where black people have collectively caught our breaths. And we just said, we can't leave this on the shoulders of Oprah, Michael Jordan, and Michael Jackson, and a few entertainers. we've got to take to the streets, and we've got to understand our kids aren't faring well, our communities aren't faring well. We've got to make sure that we're doing well in this country. And I think when we have social media, we have the intelligence, we have the connected abilities, we have the organizing skills, something's got to take place to take, again, the wind out of the sail of what could be a strong movement of Black people speaking about injustice. And so when I hear all lives matter, we know that it's clear in world history that white lives matter. It's why white people protect each other and stand up for each other and won't testify against each other by and large. But in this day and time, we're still seeing shooting after shooting after shooting. I'm even losing count. I read something last night about a gentleman who was shot. I think I won't even try to guess the city because I don't want to put that on a city that I'm not really clear on. But it gets to the point that you almost expect the next one. I think with Trayvon Martin and with Michael Brown and Tamir Rice and Eric Gardner, I think we just kept saying, oh my God, help us, Lord, help us, Lord. Then it just became so many that it increased just this great sense of fear in people's hearts. I mean, even the KKK riding around, torching crosses and wearing hoods, that was all meant to put fear in people's hearts. And I just don't think our white colleagues or even non-Black colleagues understand the extent to which Black folks are really concerned about where they are at night, where their children are. Are they okay when they're driving? Call me when you get in. Text me when you get in. Because if we're not careful, we're going to create that same sense of fear that hinders mobility, ingenuity, and great advancement. And then when our non-Black allies look on and say, well, all lives matter, you're making things worse by just acting as if Black lives are more important than others. When you look at the mortality rate, the dropout rate, special ed rate, the mass incarceration rate, I can't believe that we're still having the discussion or even the argument. And where Black lives do matter is where we generate money for white folks, whether that's in prison or special ed. If you look at the place where we're really increasing numbers in social services, just follow the money trail. There's funding, there are grants, there's a lot of money that well-intentioned white people are making off of kids, Black kids, and Black families who find themselves in these places of crisis. And Tyler, anything else you want to say about Black All Lives Matter? You want to weigh in anymore before I go on to the next one?
I was about to ask just a quick question, going back a little bit. Mm-hmm. The extroverted side of me, which is usually there, shut down, and the introverted side came out for a second, which feels like a very white thing to say. But
that felt very white. So I would agree. I would concur.
It was like when we were talking about the
your whiteness is sort of
it's like
in conflict.
Yeah. There's white conflicted. There's a question that came out for me from the last one that we actually talked about that I thought would be interesting to hear what you think. It's the question about we just want you to be on our board because we want to increase diversity. And I think the response of a lot of people when that's like when people are when it's like no, I'm not just going to be people. You will see like almost anger or frustration or exasperation come out, and they'll be like, well, hey, you told us that you need to be in positions of power, and we're trying to give you positions of places to make, and they're like, you can see them almost be like, well, you told us what to do, and now we're trying to do it, and with that quick fix, and now you're pulling it away from us. Right. So like, I guess I was just wondering what you feel like your usual response is to that, or how do you like to react to that reaction to you?
I have sort of this prepared answer. I'll tell folks in that situation, it is not my job as a Black person to make you rich and successful as a white person, but it could be my job, but it would require you paying me. Mm-hmm. And so what I feel is that if people ask me all these questions and they say, yeah, but, then I feel like I've wasted my time by explaining to them how to do what we thought was a foregone conclusion. This is right. This helps our company. It helps our bottom line. It gains us more clients or customers or gets us more. But they keep finding excuses. Then I feel like I've wasted my time. So you're going to invite me to your office, to your board meeting to explain to you how to do this. Then you're going to then tell me why it's so difficult so that I can rubber stamp your lack of effort. But if someone brings me in as a consultant, then you can choose to do what you want to do or not do, because then I've at least covered myself and I've accounted for my time. But my response is typically that. Like, so when people even ask me, I'm even trying to get to the place now where I won't even, unless it's sort of a quid pro quo scenario where it's a corporation that's really working with us anyway, they're doing great things in the community, like this board I'm joining. I watched them do things that I thought was very impressive. And so I actually brought up the subject with them. I said, maybe it's time for us to revisit that board discussion, because I feel like they just took some very honest discussions. But I'm on another board, and I got to admit, this one, it's going to be a good experience. But it was a scenario where I have a friend and fraternity brother who was the only black person on it. Goes against my policy, the only one. And he just said, you know what, Brother G, I'm rotating off. I've done my terms, but we got to have a black presence. This is a very prestigious board. And so he basically just threw my name in. So I didn't really have a choice on that one. But as I rode up the elevator to one of my first board meetings, all of the literature and the materials in the elevator, every picture was a white person. And so I didn't bring it up in a meeting because I didn't want to get that, because I'm thinking, okay, I don't want to be the black guy, the only black guy on the board. And then I talk about the all white, the homogenous poster board. So I didn't want to be that guy because I know what happens, particularly if people don't know you. So I waited until like the meeting afterwards. We kind of go into another room and have some wine. So I waited until my white friends were a little relaxed, and they threw back a couple. And so then I mentioned the whole, the whole elevator experience. One of the individuals intending to whitesplain said, well, one of my friends is in that picture, and because it was taken like 8 years ago, and the person he's with is no longer his wife. He's even got a new wife. So it was his way of saying it's just an old photo. I said, but weren't there still black people 8 years ago? Yeah. And he just kind of looked at me like, oh, okay, you got a good point. But his thing was, we're not trying to avoid black people. It's just an old photo. I'm just saying 8 years ago, there were still black people and you didn't put them in it. 15 years ago, there were still black people. 20. So tell me again what your excuse is for having an all white brochure on the elevator, but you want diversity at the board. Help me reconcile those two, because if you're going to be pushing back when I tell you this is going to help black people want to come, and your response was, it's just an old photo, and then, my work here is done.
That makes sense. Because it seems like a further reinforcement of like an economic American narrative of like exploitation of black bodies for the benefit of a company or wealth or growth of that. So, well,
because more people will see their website than their elevator.
And if they're not willing to, if they haven't built that relationship with you, or if you can't trust them yet because they haven't built it up, or they're not investing in the work you do, then it really just become, let's use you to build our economic base and all of that. So
right. So don't put me on the board and don't put me in your commercials. But then when I bring my black voice, you want to be defensive. Either you want me to be all black, my complexion, my voice, and my mind, but don't separate me. Don't decompartmentalize me. Or I'm sorry, don't compartmentalize me when I want to bring all of my integrated self to this board, because that's when I'm at my best. When I can bring my cultural experience, my life experiences, my faith experience, my leadership experience, my mind, what I've seen, what other places are doing. Because in other parts of the world that are truly progressive, they would realize this is free information. You can pay somebody $35,000 and come and talk to you about your artwork, or you could just give me another glass of wine and I'll tell you what you got to do in your elevators. But don't make it sound like I'm doing the white glove test on white racist when I'm voicing some of what I think helps us to be a much better organization that makes me proud to bring people who look like me. Because I like the organization. I want to bring people along. I don't want to be in a situation where I'm in the elevator black-splaining for white people, because I can't be that guy. I'm not going to be the black guy black-splaining for, well, what had happened was, or what they really said was, or what we're really trying to do. I see the financials. We have enough resources in the bank to put another $400 placard up in that elevator if we really wanted to. The flatware and the dishes on the table at an average lunch meeting that I have is more than what it would take to redo that poster. So let's not split hairs over that.
There's this thing about whitesplaining that I notice after reading like Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. One of the things she talks about is how a lot of times justification for stuff is not, it shifts from like a racial explanation to a race neutral explanation, not like an anti-racist one. So like the shift from Black Lives Matter to All Lives Matter is like, no, it has nothing to do with race. And the same thing with this picture. It's like you say there's a racial component to this picture, and like, oh no, it's totally irrelevant to race. It's this other sort of thing. And that seems to be the way that it, I don't know, often functions. Because as a white person, like that's really satisfying to me traditionally. Like, oh, it's actually not about race at all. It's about economics or just some dumb luck. Like that just happened to be the person they took a picture of.
Right.
There. You know, and like, but I think if you probably is what your experience is, you listen to that ad nauseum. And it's just, you know, you're like, yeah,
and I do,
hear the
and I have
explain, you know, it's some new version of, oh no, it doesn't have to do with you being black. It's just this other thing. But I think for like as a white person, it allows me to be like, oh, a little worried, thing about race. Oh, not about race. Don't need to worry.
And
We're
what they don't realize is it's really a litmus test for the black insider, because I mean, obviously, I'm a part of this organization. I joined this board, but how they respond to me, and I'm an insider, tells me how they're going to treat outsiders. So part of it is, it's not as if it's going to make or break my participation if they change their board. But if they do it, it means they're listening and they're open. But they're making it very difficult for me to find new board members and participants who look like me if you can't even respond to the fact that I'm saying this will be problematic. And you're showing a snapshot of all the activities here, and it's not showing black people. But you want black people to think they're welcome. So when they step inside, they're not going to see any of that. So part of this is, listen, I'm not getting paid for being on this board. I don't get a discount. You guys don't give me gift cards. I'm just trying to help you. But I also, that's why I also said it's not my job to make white people rich, but it can be. But that involves them paying me. Here's my last one I've got here. Then I want to switch just a little bit to the if we got enough time, just to talk about my Wisconsin Public Radio interview last week. But here's the quote I hear a lot. The alleged assailant was a deeply disturbed young person who was often bullied and alienated. This is how the media or law professionals will often describe a white mass shooter. You rarely hear about that. I remember there were folks here in Madison who raised money for Michael Brown's family to go to college after he was shot in Ferguson. And white people literally said, why are you raising money for that man's family? They're all thugs. So first of all, we don't know that. At the point, we didn't know that much about Michael Brown. But now we know that his younger siblings were they were thugs. And so, you know, we had someone on our show a few weeks ago from Austin, from Pflugerville, who's talking about how the police chief was describing this mass shooter. But you hear it, the guy who was a shooter in at the church in what was the church in the South where he killed 9 people?
Dylan Roof.
Dylan Roof, yes. Yeah, Dylan Roof. Didn't the police take him to Burger King or Arby's or someplace? They took him through a drive-through. Now, some were trying to say, we're whitesplaining, that he was trying to get them, they were trying to get him to confess. Yeah, and I guess a Whopper makes you tell the truth, that they were trying to give some truth serum in it. But for you to be able to right away, I mean, there's so many black men who die because they've not put their hands up or they've looked suspicious, and you've got a person that just shot all these folks, and killed all these folks, and you take them to a restaurant. But just the fact is, whether or not it was a drive-through or not, this is certainly what I heard. But the point is, their photos look differently. They're not put under the same scrutiny. They're not seen as a true menace to society, or they are such an anomaly that they're very atypical, that this is not how white people think. But when it's someone black who's doing something like that, the photos and the mug shots and the comments and things that take place just makes it completely different. But I've yet to hear someone who is black who's either been shot by police officers or who have perpetrated some crime being talked about in such a warm and humanizing manner. So when I start hearing these descriptions, I almost know for a fact these folks are white.
This is the thing that I always notice too. I mean, like, I don't have any like longitudinal data to back this up, but like a lot of the we talk about, there's the unarmed black men that get shot. They're often, I've never heard them described as being innocent, right?
Oh, right.
You know, because like we can't take that step to say that a person who is in a car being pulled over by the cops and informs them that they have a concealed weapon in perfect compliance with all laws is completely innocent because he's black, right? But there's often talk of other kinds of innocent bystanders. Innocent bystander gets shot doing this, but we can't. It's like it is beyond our like social language to say that like that they were innocent.
Right. It's just. And I think what that's doing is just putting more and more fear in people's hearts. I also think that's part of the plan that as we start talking more about our plight, our being black, our plight, what we want to do, if we begin to defend some of these unarmed people, then we're made to appear to be biased or not really clear in our thinking. And so we're aligning ourselves with someone who, well, they shouldn't have been stealing rolling papers or, cigarette papers anyway, where they should have had their hands up. I think Franklin Graham wrote an open letter and just said, if black parents would just teach their kids to do what the police officers say, they stop being shot. And that's a whole nother show. I shouldn't even have let his name come out of my mouth. But just that attitude that we must be doing something wrong. We must be lazy. We must be incompetent. We must not be able to do this is crazy.
Well, one of the things that white people say to me when I talk to them about like mass incarceration, there's like, well, I mean, like, who's doing the crimes?
Right.
And I'm like, really?
Right.
I'm like the
we don't have enough prisons to hold all the white criminals. We don't have enough.
The largest category of drug users are white males between the age of 19 and 24, and they're the least represented in prison. Like, that's who's doing the crimes. They don't happen to be in jail.
And people don't believe that. So they think if that were the truth, we would know it. I was doing an interview last week with Wisconsin Public Radio, and they wanted to ask me a few questions about the Philly Starbucks incident. And guys, at some point, I would maybe at the end of this interview or someplace else, let's link that interview somewhere on a podcast. But one caller called in and said, well, stop loitering, buy a cup of coffee, and just stop whining. And so I was actually in New York when I got this call. I did on my cell phone. I had to actually hold my breath, kind of count to 3, because in the past I've sounded defensive on these shows because I can't believe the comments people make. It's a coffee shop. I mean, maybe they do. Do they have no loitering signs in coffee shops?
Not that I'm aware of. I've never seen one.
Now think about that. It's a meetup place. It's it's America's meetup place. These coffee shops, and so we know this. And as I mentioned again, I was in New York last week. I love New York, and our listeners are growing in that area. But we need them to tell some more of their friends because New Jersey really just passed them up. So, hey, Big Apple people. Your folks across the river had just passed you up. But I was in the Starbucks and I ordered some lemonade. It was a black guy at the counter. It was a barista. I says, hey, bro, I'm not trying to be funny, but do you all have a bathroom? And am I going to get in trouble if I go into it? He said, no, we got one right around the corner. Now, I mean, I know I was being somewhat facetious, but it was a big city, and I know that in a lot of places in New York, you can't just go and use a bathroom. But, I mean, it's just so, I know I was trying to be funny when I said that, but it just makes me think more and more about this. But this guy said, stop loitering. Now, I saw people with their backpacks on chairs, with their heads on their closed laptops, taking naps. I went to the Starbucks that's right in the bottom of the Empire State Building on 34th Street. I saw people who were sitting there who didn't just run in to get a latte and run out. They're meeting up and maybe they sat for a while. Like if I saw a table, I was waiting for someone, I might have sat until someone came just so I could have them save my seat while I get stuff. But just the fact that this guy says stop loitering, I could see if it's a mall or a school or a courthouse. We are now assigning loitering with all the white folks that have had meetings and have made multi-million-dollar deals sitting in a Starbucks. All of a sudden now, you want to call what the black men did loitering. They said they're going to meet up at Starbucks. I'm sure there are other places where they could have met. I'm sure they walked past 3 rib joints in Philly or a hoagie shop or something. They went there because that's where they wanted to meet and perhaps order coffee. But like I might do when I'm meeting friends, I wait until they come because my coffee will get cold because I'm a slow coffee person. But he said basically stop whining and stop loitering. So I tried to handle that right. You're going to... loitering.
I'm a barista at a coffee shop, and it like the amount of people who like come in and will order like the smallest or cheapest thing on the menu and sit there for 8 hours.
Exactly. If people are timing how long you're sitting there before you order something, how long is it going to be before they start measuring or counting or assessing what you spent in order, that you sit there. I know better than just to go to a restaurant and not order. I want to do that and I want to tip, I want to help folks. But, he called it loitering.
Starbucks also has this belief that they they advertise within called the third space.
Mm-hmm.
So they believe, your home,
right,
your workplace are important to you, the first couple spaces, and then the third space they want to be Starbucks. So they want it to feel comfortable enough that it's the third most important place where you spend your time and you meet with other people. So I think those things just kind of become contradictory when you look at it. That certainly not everyone is welcome to have that third space beyond that. And I think a lot of people do need that, and that's a good concept. But again, is it just in name only? It certainly doesn't include certain people. And I think what Leleda said in our previous episode about being at a white space.
Right.
So this is a white third space, but not for everybody.
Right. Not exactly. And again, I think we understand that this is not necessarily indicative of every Starbucks or coffee joint. But I think it does show us that it is certainly something that Black people question. Mm-hmm. Are we okay to go to this neighborhood? Are we okay to be in this restaurant? Are we okay to go here for coffee? That there's just that little extra step of thinking, are we invading too much? Are we enclosing on white space? Or why is it that we appear to be a threat? Guys, there have been some studies that have shown that when law enforcement will take a look, or white individuals will take a look at pictures or photos of Black folks, they typically will think that a young girl who is 11 is 15, that a young man who's 13 is 17, that for whatever reason, our size, our complexion, people typically think that we're older than we are, which could mean maybe that we can handle more abuse or trauma, or we're more of a threat. But just that idea that that this could still happen in places is just it's a little crazy. And what happens is it gets in your head a little bit. You're wondering that when you're in this space, how do you make sure that that you're protected? There was a story I read online a couple weeks ago. A young boy who was white wanted to go to the men's bathroom. His mom was trying to get him to go with her. So basically, he came in, used the restroom, couldn't reach the sink. So he climbed underneath the stall. And there was a Black man in there who was using the bathroom. I don't know if you saw it. Well, he filmed it because he didn't want the kid going to say anything inappropriate happen. And the guy filming it was really nice. I saw that the little boy's dad wrote a note, said, "Thank you for being so nice to my son. Sometimes he's curious, overly curious." But I just think that as Black folks, a lot of times we're just thinking, all right, I'm Black, this kid is white. Folks are going to take a 5-year-old's word over mine. And I know my family does a lot of advocacy work about abuse, so we know that a lot of times kids are not lying about these incidents. But just the fact that he had to protect himself, which is why I always make sure I have a receipt, I have a bag. Like I just don't walk. I talked about this on another show. There are things I want to do to just downplay any sense of suspicion, but it's just that extra piece that many of us go through living in America. That do we need to do something special just to prove I have not crossed any lines here, I've not done anything here, I'm a customer, here's my receipt, I bought something, let me put my coffee in clear view, let me go get a rewarm on it, it's been an hour, let me go get a brownie, let me leave a good tip. It's just that extra step, which is okay. Listen, it's a lot easier than what my grandparents and great-grandparents went through. So I'm not saying this is the America of 150 years ago, but I'm just saying the attitudes of people from 150 years ago is not completely eradicated. And that's why we're seeing a situation here where someone Black, it seemed, they seem like they're a threat. I think we had a conversation where someone was telling me their friends actually are baristas in that city and have to call the police a lot on the homeless population, and if they seem to be threatening or whatever. But that's not pertinent to this case. I mean, that's not pertinent at all. If these folks were not presenting like they were homeless or they were trying to live there overnight, it's still a way of thinking that this cannot be about race, and so much is.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, like, it always is like the shifting away from like 2 Black men arrested, call the police on them. Like, this is about race, and then like the comment, the loitering comment. It's like, no, not about race at all. It's just about criminality. I'm like, I can walk my white ass in there, sit down, and do like buy nothing for 4 hours. But if I like, if I have an ironic hipster bag, which I do, and like use my laptop, no one will ever say anything to me. I used to tutor students in coffee shops. I would be there for 4 hours. I would buy nothing. No one would ever say anything to me.
And I think it's so hard for people to believe that there are 2 Americas like that. I think that's part of it. I think what's happening is a lot of people are awakening. Again, I love history. with the cameras being shown at the Edmund Pettus Bridge and people being beaten and hosed, white co-eds as well as black co-eds having hot coffee thrown on them at the Woolworth counter in North Carolina. When America saw that, some of America gasped, thinking, "Wait, we always assumed people provoked it. We thought that they were throwing things. We thought that they were starting things. You just hosed a woman." I mean, some of the power, the force of those hoses would rip women's hair right out. They watched people unprovoked having this happen to them. It began to change the heart of America. When they saw white kids having coffee poured on them, and black kids together, some of the cities some of the desegregation laws moved to cities and changed their segregation laws in about 54 cities in a 9-month period across the U.S. because people saw it. So I think what's happening is folks have assumed that all lives matter, that black people are whiners, that we're lazy, and rather than just saying we've been here for 400 years, that we want our piece of the pie, we want it free. But I think when they're witnessing this, I think for the white patrons who were in that Starbucks, you couldn't have paid them to believe that they could be sitting next to the table doing the same thing that a black person's doing and treated differently. So I think part of what happened, even in some of the comments they made, you could tell that they were very incredulous. Like, how could this be happening? And so I'm hoping that more people are watching, that they're listening, and rather than just whitesplaining the things away, just like if I were sitting there, if I knew someone who was black or of another ethnicity, could have an honest conversation about how do you read this scenario. So I think part of what we model today is what we want true friends to be able to do, not demonizing each other, but just having a true conversation. You know, one other comment I got on WPR, Wisconsin Public Radio's on Central Time, someone called in and just basically said, "Hey, I'm white. I recently went to a box retailer to buy equipment. I was dressed in work clothes, but my friend who's also a security professional could hear over his walkie-talkie or his radio that people were saying, 'Suspicious white man.' There was 3 guys walking together. He tuned into their station, and they found out he could hear them saying that they were following them around the store. And I think his point was, you know, this has happened to me too. And I said, I held my breath, counted to 3, and I said, you know, I'm sorry that happened to you. No one should be singled out. But let me tell you something. America is a box retailer to me. When you walked outside that store, you stopped being followed. When I walk out the store, I'm still followed. It's just they pass it off to someone else. And so I'm not going to let you sit here and say to me that this is what life is like to you. But when he walked outside that store, no one else thought that he was suspicious.
Well, there's something, so for me, like, I come from rural Pennsylvania. I was more or less white trash growing up. Sorry, family. And one of the things that one of the things that happened to me when I was a kid that I've kept with me as an adult is like my dad had to talk to me when I was a kid. You know, like I think I was like 13. He took me to a store and bought me a suit coat, and he was like, "Look, it's like if you go into an interview, you dress up, you dress nice, you make sure you're clean, you wear good shoes, and you talk as best as you can." And it's like, and if you're working at a job where somebody's treating you poorly, you don't say anything to them. You be as nice as possible to them, because if they're in a position of power over you, they could really mess your life up. You kill them with kindness. And so for me, this was it's a little talk about like our economic place in the world. And when I've heard of like black parents having the talk with their kids about being black, I'm like, oh, like, a similar thing happened to me as a child. It's not the same. And I don't think that my experience means that like my economic situation growing up and the situation of African Americans are the same, but it is some point of similarity that allows me to have a little bit of understanding of the other situation. But like for me, it means like it's a little glimpse into a world that I don't know, as opposed to something that disproves that it exists in general.
The bulk of conversations I have like that involves white people trying to explain it's not that bad. Like they can't wrap their mind around someone black, professional, intelligent, articulate, clean, could really experience such a different reality. And it's crazy, and it's really the case, and so it's just wild. It really is.
The one thing I'll say is like I think for there's a path as a poor white kid to become like I can like go to school and learn how to talk right and not have the accent of my location, and there's a clear path in my lifetime that I can be in a place and I can present myself and no one will have any idea about like the pickle and pimento loaf that I ate when I was a kid, and like the ketchup I pulled over everything. Like I can totally pass beyond that thing when I was a kid. But the race is entirely different.
It is, because the people who see you aren't necessarily assuming that that's your background, and so your dad wants you to have a jacket so that you can probably represent yourself and your family well. My family's telling me to do the same thing, make sure your lights and plates are working, because of the assumptions that are already made about black people. So it's not just so that I can represent the G family well. It's because they have had experiences. They've watched cops. They've done things, and they already have this conception in their heads, and they want me to not speak into any of those or lean into any of those, because my life could really be on the line. And so, gentlemen, I really, really appreciate this segment, and I think it's important for folks and for friends to have these cross-cultural dialogues, and because we need to show our various perspectives so that we can help black folks and white folks and people from other ethnic backgrounds to just understand the care with which we've got to go about these cross-cultural relationships, the grace that we've got to continue to extend to each other, because we want this to work, but we bring all of who we are to the table. And sometimes some of who we are has been scarred or shaped by other things, but as long as we commit to the process, I think we can continue to do better work. So I really appreciate that the Black Like Me podcast makes room for this kind of discussion. I want to remind friends and folks to listen that you can still subscribe, because if you don't, you miss the exciting episodes. But if you subscribe, we automatically push the episodes right to your computer or your smartphone. And so we want you to do that. So you can go to iTunes, or you can go to Spotify, and you can just type in Black Like Me and subscribe to the show. And if you are listening, or a friend's telling you about this, and you're trying to figure out how you can listen to it if you don't use your smartphone this way, you can always go to alexg.com and you can listen to each episode weekly. So this has been another great and insightful episode about life in America. And so thank you for being a supporter of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. I enjoy doing these podcasts. And so if you want to ask questions, if you want to participate, if you want us to pick up topics on a segment that's called White People Want to Know, then, look me up on Facebook on Dr. Alex G and just do hashtag Black Like Me and ask your question, or tweet out to me at Alex G Jr. We would love to interact with you. Hey, like we always say, we want you to listen, we want you to learn and live better.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at www.alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.